So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Labour. Is sanity the price to pay for power? And that's a question we're going to be discussing in this video, especially towards the end of it. So this video will discuss Labour's constant movements on certain positions, their bad statements and poor messaging. We will be talking about the issues Labour have in the context of messaging and communication, the communications mess they're in. We'll be talking about two political commentators as well to further kind of contextualise the impact this is all having on Labour's most ardent fans and supporters. Labour have shifted positions of many different pieces of legislation and policies. We'll be discussing 3 of these pieces of legislation and some other issues which have tied Labour in knots because of their policy shifts and their awful comms teams. So we'll be discussing the Public Order Act 2023, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022, and the Illegal Immigration Bill. The Public Order Act was a piece of legislation that Labour was heavily critical of while the bill for the act was in Parliament, but which they now insinuate they will not actually repeal. This is an instance where the messaging has been very mixed and has spun people around as to what Labour would actually do with this law. The Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022, very catchy, I know, which is closely related to that Public Order Act, is another act which Labour initially opposed, but which Labour recently has been very quiet about. The Illegal Immigration Bill is a bill that Labour also has been very critical of, especially in the context of its impacts on not only asylum seekers, but also on women who have been trafficked to the UK and would face deportation if they went to the police. Labour's mixed messaging on policies such as nationalising of assets like rail and their numerous broken promises which make it hard for anyone to actually know what's going on. It makes the party look untrustworthy. Commentators are trying to justify, or at least some commentators are trying to justify these policy shifts, and they get tied up in their analysis in their videos and programmes, and it just gets embarrassing after a certain point. Thus we ask the question,
to pay for power?
So, Labour's shifting position on the Public Order Act and their faulty arguments for no longer opposing it. So before the Public Order Act was passed, Labour was highly critical of the bill, and to their credit voted against the bill in both the Commons and the Lords. As Labour Shadow Home Office Minister Sarah Jones stated, quote, "Labour and crossbenchers in the House of Lords voted to stop journalists being arrested or prosecuted for reporting on protests, and to stop law-abiding passers by being stopped and searched simply for walking near a protest. The police have themselves said they don't need these new powers. Rightly, they already have powers to stop serious disruption and dangerous protests, and Labour supports the police in using them. But as usual, ministers are more interested in manufacturing rows than helping the police to do their job," end quote. And in spite of a vigorous opposition to the bill by Labour, as well as by the Lib Dems, the Greens and other parties, the Tories used their overwhelming majority to force it through. Labour took a similar position with an earlier bill that was a companion to the Public Order Act, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022, which among other powers famously gives the police to stop and search people without cause. In criticising the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022, during its passage through Parliament, Lammy observed that, quote, "This is no time to be rushing through poorly thought out measures to impose disproportionate controls on free expression and the right to protest. Now is the time to unite the country and put in place long overdue protections for women against unacceptable violence, including action against domestic homicides, rape and street harassment. We must tackle the misogynistic attitudes that underpin the abuse women face. Instead, the Conservatives have brought forward a bill that is seeking to divide the country. It is a mess which could lead to harsher penalties for damaging a statue than for attacking a woman," end quote. This sentiment was further echoed by Nick Thomas Simmons, Labour's then Shadow Home Secretary, when he said, quote, "It completely fails to act on the measures Labour set out in our plan for tackling violence against women and girls, and will do nothing to address the shameful lack of support for victim services. The measures outlined in the bill disproportionately and unnecessarily remove the rights to peaceful protest," end quote. So at the same time both these bills were in Parliament, Labour rightly criticised them and voted against them. So just a quick correction, it's the Public Order Bill that deals with locking on and also deals with being searched without cause. So this is the one where the police can search you without probable cause. stop and search powers on suspicion, stop and search without suspicion, and this is the one that deals with in intent, whilst the other one, the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, the 2022 one, that's the one that deals with public nuisance. So I've mixed them up slightly in certain places. So I just want to offer a quick correction on that one, just in case anyone gets confused or anything like that. But both these bills are problematic. Back to the video. So we'll discuss the problems with these laws. So as I mentioned, as I mentioned before, but not only particularly the onerous issue with the Police Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022 is that the police can stop and search people without cause. As to the Public Order Act, a major but not only complaint of human rights organisations and civil society is that the powers of charging and arrest provided for the new law are very vague, and that's a massive problem. Individually, each of the laws are very problematic from a human rights standpoint, but when working in tandem, these two laws go from bad to draconian. Under the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022, the police can stop and search people without cause. So the police can say, we think you may intend to commit a crime, and thus we are going to search you. And if they find you in possession of a placard fastener, then under Part 1, Section 1C of the Public Order Act, they can arrest you on the grounds that you intend to use fasteners to fasten or, quote, lock, end quote, yourself to a pole or other object. This is what happened during the coronation, where protesters from the group Republic were arrested for carrying fasteners. The police stated they believed that the group would use these fasteners to lock themselves to some objects along the route, while the protesters stated they intended to use them for securing placards they had with them at the time of their arrest. In the end, the police let them go, saying, quote, those arrests stated the items would be used to secure their placards, and the investigation has been unable to prove intent to use them to lock up and disrupt the event. Ellipses. This event, all six have had their bail cancelled and no further action will be taken. We regret that those six people were arrested. Those 6 people arrested were unable to join the wider group of protesters in Trafalgar Square and elsewhere in the procession route, end quote. The point is that under these laws, people can find themselves being arrested simply for carrying normal items at any protest. There are around 64 protesters arrested during the coronation, some under the 2022 Policing Act, some under the 2023 Public Order Act. This included 3 people who were volunteers for the Westminster City Council's Night Starts programme who were arrested for handing out rape alarms. The police argued that these rape alarms could have been used to cause disruption. So imagine you're a woman at a protest, near a protest, or just minding your own damn business, and the police search you because they can. They don't need a reason, and they find a rape alarm. They can arrest you for that. In fact, they can even arrest you for handing them out as well. This falls under the 2022 Act as being a public nuisance, which is something the police also arrested people for. So in tandem, the two laws are a massive problem, allowing you to be searched without a need for cause, and if you're carrying items that make noise or can lock onto something, then boom, you're nicked. A statement from the Met Police confirms this. Quote, brackets, the police, close bracket, searched the vehicle and as well as a large number of placards found items at the time which they had reasonable grounds to believe could be used as lock-on devices. Taking into account the information they had and the overall concern regarding security, 6 people were arrested on suspicion of going equipped for locking on, contrary to Section 2 Public Order Act 2023. They did so end quote. So they did not prove intent at all. Just having the items was enough to get arrested, quote, because they could have been used as locking on devices, end quote. Once again, no proof of intent for perfectly normal protest items. It does not even say what grounds they searched the van for, because they don't have to anymore. They don't need cause. It goes even beyond this. As was stated by Amnesty International, the 2023 bill sets, quote, a very low threshold to define disruptive protesting, end quote, and that was obviously before the act was passed. So it's up to the police to judge it, while the government may set out guidance for what the police can do, if they want to. But then it's just that, it's guidance, it's merely guidance, and not legally binding on the police. So, these acts give the tone-deaf Met Police that have been found to be institutionally racist and misogynistic unprecedented powers. Like, they don't care. The Met Police do not care, and giving them more powers allows them to bully more protesters and to continue to harass women. At the coronation, one such woman was arrested just for being in the vicinity of a Just Stop Oil protester, or protesters. She was just there. She wasn't even doing anything and she got arrested. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, they can arrest you. And it's not just the Met Police. Last year, the Herefordshire Police arrested a journalist who was covering a Just Stop Oil protest. They arrested her under the 2022 Police Act. They later apologised, but the fact is they arrested her simply because she was covering the protest. The 2023 Act was meant to give journalists more protection, but we saw another journalist arrested at the coronation because these laws give the police too much power, discretionary and otherwise. Even David Davies called this out, saying, quote, we should also review the viability of charges like, quote, conspiracy to cause a public nuisance, end quote. He says, quote, they appear to require very little evidence and almost amount to a pre-crime. This sort of preemptive arrest should only be used to prevent violence or crimes involving various serious harm, end quote. David Davies is on, he voted for these bills, but yet he is more willing to actually try and fight back against these bills than the Labour Party are. Yeah, he's a clown for voting them through, but at least he's doing the right thing now, and that's the only thing you can give him credit for. David goddamn Davies. These powers, they're made to deter protesters and journalists from turning up to protest because you can get arrested. That's the point of them. The Met Police says it, quote, understands public concern, end quote, over the arrests and claims that, quote, protest is lawful and can be disruptive, end quote, but claims, quote, this depends on context. The coronation is a once-in-a-generation event, and that is a key consideration in our assessment, end quote. But as a journalist who works for The Independent, Lizzie Dearden pointed out, quote, the quote legal grounds for that bracket are close bracket unclear, end quote. So this is on shaky ground, people. This is the point. These laws don't make sense. Labour is well aware of these problems in these laws. That's why they voted against the bills. So why have Labour been so confusing on whether or not they will repeal these laws? And they have given the impression that they have flipped on this issue. That's a question they've been asked repeatedly. While it may be true that they need to sort out both of these bills because of their nature, when we look at the timeline of how they have responded to the questions around these laws, it's not pretty and shows why Labour is just a mess when it comes to communications. So the timeline of what Labour said. So David Lammy really kicked this off and originally was asked about repealing the anti-protest bill. He clearly dodged the question when saying Labour can't go back picking through Tory legislation because they won't have time.
As a Labour.
So when asked about the legislation, this is, he's going to be asked about it, and you notice the straw man that he gives.
Government to
Lammy.
Repeal this legislation, which is totally unnecessary, given that you agree it's unnecessary, and the other legislation this liberticide government has passed, which is attempting to control and repress our right to protest and our right to oppose legally and legitimately actions by our government.
This repeal question, you get this a lot in politics. We can't come into office picking through all the Conservative legislation and repealing. It would take up so much parliamentary time. We need a positive agenda. The primary thing is cost of living, inflation, and getting growth back into this country. Keir Starmer's been right to prioritise it. And in the last item, we were talking about the local elections. It's clear.
It's clear it's a straw man. He was asked about specific laws, and he goes to, we can't go through unpicking all the Tory legislation, and Labour MPs aren't even convinced by David Lammy's answer. So it's just ridiculous. He just completely straw man the other dude, and that's one of the things that causes Labour problems, is stuff like this where people say dumb things and then Labour don't know how to correct it properly. Lammy's statement being that bad that Labour MPs expressed unease, saying they would seek clarification. One said, quote, David Lammy is right. You could spend 5 years unpicking every bit of legislation what you need to do is prioritise what you're going to overturn and replace it with a positive vision. And in a democracy, the right to protest is fundamental, end quote. And it seems like there's a slight misquote there, or a mistake, because he said, the Labour MP has said, Lammy said they can't repeal all the Tory legislation. But it looks like Labour MPs aren't even buying this. Labour can't convince their own MPs on this time limit issue. It gets even more comical because according to Caroline Lucas, the Green Party leader, this is a clear lie, and that Labour with a majority could overturn this legislation within a day. 1 day. and if Labour were in a minority government or part of a coalition, the smaller parties would help them overturn it. So frankly speaking, all of this stuff about Labour not having enough time is just rubbish. Caroline Lucas has said this is rubbish. This Labour MP, the one that was quoted, is basically saying you have to have priorities, and the right to protest is fundamental. It's just madness, and we've got more here. A Labour spokesperson then came out and said, quote, Labour will ensure that the historic right to peaceful protest is protected alongside action to prevent dangerous protests or serious disruption. We oppose the public order bill. We continue to believe that the police already had the powers they need to prevent serious disruption, and we continue to believe that things like the measures on speech, suspicionless stop and search are not right. They go on to say, quote, under a Labour government, new Home Office legislation will be needed in a series of different areas to implement key Labour policies and undo the damage the Tories have done on issues ranging from violence against women to policing to the chaos in the asylum system. We will look at the detail of what legislation is needed to address these issues, end quote. So that's what it looks like the spokesperson appears to be saying is that Labour wants to pass their own kind of police bill or their own kind of Home Office bill around a major amount of issues, and that would be the opportunity to address the laws we have talked about, the draconian ones. But these are two different messages here. One from Lammy saying Labour won't have enough time to deal with the bad Tory laws, and one from the spokesperson probably exercising damage control saying Labour will have to look at the details of what legislation is needed, even around the context of these laws, because Labour says they don't support suspicionless stop and search. But if the approach of the Labour spokesperson is the one taken, then wouldn't that obviously eat up parliamentary time, which according to Lammy, Labour do not have? Further, the Tories say similar things to what Starmer said regarding peaceful protests. This from a government fact sheet. Quote, this government fully supports the right of individuals to engage in peaceful protests. However, the serious disruption caused by a small minority of protesters has highlighted that more needs to be done to protect the public and businesses from these unacceptable actions. End quote. So the question is, what does either side define as peaceful protest? Because here both parties appear to be saying similar things. In addition, Nandi on the 9th, after all the Lammy stuff kind of happened, said it's clear if there's a problem with the legislation, it's that, quote, potentially it was so widely drawn, end quote. No, the problem with the legislation is that it permits for normal people to be arrested for carrying normal items that people might carry with them, like rape alarms or items you would normally have a protest, like placard fasteners, as all of that stuff, the suspicionless search and everything else, essentially pre-crimes. You can be arrested for what the police deem as you could potentially commit a crime with. It's just nonsense. The police, the problem is that the police don't have to prove intent. If they think you're going to cause a problem, then that's enough for them. But Nandi also said, quote, if there is a problem with the legislation, of course we will rectify it, end quote. That's in the context of talking about these draconian laws. So here's Lisa Nandi being asked about the legislation and the bills and stuff like that, and her answer, again, different to Lammy. She was asked directly about what Lammy said about the time argument and all of this kind of nonsense. So let's listen to what Nandi said.
This particular part of the legislation about locking on, we don't think it's acceptable for people to start using devices to obstruct, to cause potential public safety risks, to chain themselves to ambulances, for example, would be completely unacceptable. But what we were... And
I agree with Nandi on this one. I don't think people locking on to things is disruptive. And like I said, it defends how people define peaceful protests. There was the kid who he zip-tied himself to, I think it was the Everton goalpost. His protest being peaceful, but it was incredibly disruptive. I don't like that stuff. Just like I don't like what they did at the snooker game either with the orange powder, wherever it was. But the issue isn't that this law just stops that kind of stuff or punishes that kind of stuff. It's the intent stuff, which she talks about.
Concerned about with this legislation is that potentially it was so widely drawn that it could catch up innocent people who were just trying to either peacefully protest or actually even just going about their business.
And we know the law did that. We know that these laws, the 2022 one, the police sentencing bill, and the public order bill 2023, we know these laws did this for a fact.
Not clear in this case whether the problem is with the legislation or whether the problem is more operational and a matter for the police.
So would you repeal it? One of the questions
we have.
So, yeah, and so for me, it's not operational, it's about the police, because you've given the police powers to do stuff, and so they will use said powers. You can't be like, I can't believe they stop and search people without cause, so you've given them the power to do so. That's the problem. And so, like you heard there, the interviewer asked, would you repeal it?
Well, look, one of the questions we have is, why was it that this group were clearly in contact with the Metropolitan Police, had informed them about their plans, and yet still ended up arrested and prevented from protesting? If there is a problem with the legislation, of course we'll rectify that in government, but we're not into just wholesale repeal of legislation without understanding what the actual problem is first. That was our criticism of the Conservatives a few weeks ago.
So for me, like I said, and like I've kind of laid out in the video, is that the problem is the legislation. That absolutely 100% the problem is the legislation. It gives police too much powers and it's too vague. You know, guidance and all this stuff. It's not operational problems here, guys. It's the police have the power to do something, therefore they have decided to use them. That's the problem. You can't give, especially a police force like the Met Police, you cannot give them these sorts of powers because they do not care. They're institutionally racist, they're institutionally sexist, and they've had this problem for decades now. Have they changed? No, because they don't care, and they know politicians won't do anything about it. That's the problem. Now, if there were no problems with the legislation, why did the Labour Party oppose these bills so much before they became law? We went through the quotes earlier. But here you have a slight movement of Labour's position from both Nandi and the spokesperson saying they will have a look at these laws if there is a problem, will look to fix it, versus what Lammy said, which is Labour won't have enough time to pick through all of the Tory laws. But then on that same day, when Nandi spoke, Starmer came out and said, we need to, quote, let the legislation bed down, end quote, arguing that just, quote, because police have a power does not mean they have to use it, end quote. Like, my guy, have you not met the Met Police? Have you not seen the Met Police talk about, Starmer talks about operational mistakes. The Met Police arrested journalists despite him wearing his press credentials and showing that to the officers. It isn't about guidance when you have a police force like the Met who just don't care. So this is the clip where Starmer is asked about, repealing the acts and all this kind of other stuff, and this is the answer that really rug pulled a lot of the commentary, I guess.
Why wouldn't a Labour government repeal the Public Order Act? I mean, if Labour... the whole history of Labour is a history of protest.
Well, I think there are two things going on here. On the one hand, I think most people say the police need powers to deal with Just Stop Oil and some of their tactics. They do need powers to deal with that. But on the other hand, there's a balance to be...
So, and Peston's right, because that's what the Labour spokesperson said. The police already have enough powers to deal with this stuff.
Which is to protect free, and peaceful protest. Operational decisions were made over the weekend. Some were right, some were wrong. The police themselves accepted that a number of them were wrong. That needs to be a learning experience.
They didn't apologise, though. They didn't apologise for what they did. And so I don't think they'll see it as a learning experience. They did what they wanted to, which was arrest people indiscriminately to stop them going to a protest. That's what they wanted to do, and that's what they did, in my opinion, at least.
Legislation needs to bed
down. But you won't repeal the Act.
Well, I think
there you go. Straight up, you won't repeal the Act. This is about the Public Order Bill 23.
We need to let it bed in. Yeah. We need to look at how it operates in practice. Very often with public order legislation, as you know, there's a period of bedding in. Just because the police have got a power, it doesn't mean they have to use it in every situation. Yeah. Guidance emerges. Yeah. So we haven't even got to that stage yet.
And, the guidance, like I said, it's not legally binding, so a really poor answer from Starmer here. It isn't about guidance when you have a police force like the Met who just don't care. The guidance is not legally binding. Beyond that, the police used the Police Crime and Sentencing Courts Act of 2022 that was passed around over a year ago. So does Starmer need that one to, quote, bed down, end quote, as well? Because that one was passed ages ago. It doesn't make any sense. It is these laws that are the problem. So I'd ask Labour, how many protesters have to be locked up before you take this bill seriously? Because we saw some 60-odd protesters arrested at the coronation, and if Labour wins the election and this stuff keeps happening, who will you blame at that point? Because Just Stop Oil are not stopping anytime soon. You can't have a democratic country and just arrest protesters for the most stupid reasons. Even worse, arresting people for crimes they haven't even committed. And yet Starmer's not even committed to repealing the legislation or amending it, despite some of the issues we have listed. What more does Labour have to, what more does Labour want at this point? Like, 3 different things have been laid out in the space of a few days. When Starmer was asked straight up about repealing the 2023 Act, he just dodged the question like Lammy did. So if these laws are a problem, are Labour going to do something about it, like the spokesperson and Nandi said? Or are they just going to leave it because they claim they don't have enough time to deal with these laws, despite them previously saying how bad the laws were? Make it make sense, please. When a politician is asked a straight question and dodges that question, it normally means they have not come up with an actual answer yet, or it means they have no intention of carrying out anything on the subject being asked of them. In this case, repealing these bills, or amending these bills, or laws, should I say. So they dodge the questions. Yes, I am reading between the lines here a bit, but I can back up what I'm saying. You can see a consistency in the answers they are giving. They have given us more than enough with their "we don't have time" excuse that they have stuck with. Sometimes reading between the lines can be a bit dodgy, but I think in this case, I have every right to say that, Labour don't really look to have an intention to fix these bills. Labour not stopping the illegal immigration bill, so this one stings, honestly. So Labour also have not, stopped the illegal immigration bill, a law that Braverman admits could break international law and clearly states that on the front of the bill. That's how bad it is. Labour, through the House of Lords, had the chance to delay this bill, as they had enough Lords to basically reject it again. This would have stopped the Lords being allowed to amend the bill, but would have at least kicked the bill into next year, delaying it by that long. I have not actually heard anything from Labour around why they did this, or should I say why they didn't intervene. I've heard one person say, well, now that Sunak got his bill passed, he has no excuse for not stopping the boats. I'm not sure if Sunak said he will actually stop all the boats, but one of his 5 pledges was to pass new laws to stop the small boats. And that, according to the government website, says, we will pass new laws to stop small boats, making sure that if you come to this country illegally, you're detained swiftly and removed, end quote. That's what it says on the government website with the 5 pledges. If Sunak has said anything outside of that, then fair, but he will go back to what the website says. So the Labour Party just handed him this pledge on a platter because the law is going to pass. Or should I say this bill was going to pass. If Labour had blocked the bill, what would Sunak have done? Blame Labour for the Tories not passing it when the guy has a huge majority. The right-wing press would run with it at some point, but Labour are going to get punched by the right-wing press anyways, so at least they could have defended themselves from the moral high ground here. This bill, which will forcibly deport people to Rwanda, means that victims of trafficking face deportation if they go to the police, despite being the victims of a crime or even multiple crimes here. Especially, women that are victims of human trafficking can be subjected to some really horrific things. Labour could actually have helped protect these people for a year. Yes, you can argue that you can't blame Labour for what the Tories do, but you can blame them for failing to do the right thing, especially when they had the chance to do so. It looks as if even the Labour Lords are kind of dismayed by this. So this is a tweet from Chris Renard, who is a Lib Dem Lord. He said, quote, proud to be one of the 65 Lib Dem Lords who voted tonight to stop the dreadful immigration bill. Just 8 Labour Lords did the same thing. A Labour peer said afterwards, quote, if we can be this effing awful in opposition, how bad are we going to be in government, end quote. If this quote is true, which I don't have any reason to really doubt Lord Renard here, this Labour Lord not only does not get the strategy that Labour are coming out with here, and clearly doesn't agree with it, and seems to be dismayed at what Labour are doing. This is what Yvette Cooper said about the bill. She said, quote, it won't deliver controlled and managed safe alternatives. Instead, it will cut them back and it will rip up our long-standing commitment to international law, ellipses. It will lock up children, remove support and safe refuge from women who have been trafficked, and it will delay citizenship for people like Mo Farah, end quote. Referring to a tweet posted on the Prime Minister's account, which said, quote, if you come to the UK illegally, you can't benefit from our modern slavery protections, end quote. Miss Cooper noted, quote, bringing people into the UK illegally in order to control and exploit them is exactly what trafficking is. Ellipses, the message from the UK government to the criminal trafficking and slavering gangs is that, don't worry, so long as you bring people into this country illegally, we won't help them. In fact, we will help you, end quote. This is the bill they could have delayed for around a year. Look at how scathing Cooper's comments are, yet they missed that chance and in the process even allowed Sunak to meet one of his pledges. There is no moral or political justification for this. I've seen someone try to justify it, and we'll get to that later, but when you have the chance to do the right thing, you take it. Do not forget that. Moving around on nationalising rail. So this one's another bizarre one. So, in the leadership contest, Starmer promised to bring rail into common ownership as alongside other utilities. However, some months later, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, stated, quote, "So we have scrapped the 2019 manifesto. That is not the starting point." End quote. So Reeves has insinuated that Labour would not bring rail into common ownership because that was part of the Labour 2019 manifesto. Reeves said the party would not be going into the next election. Labour would be going into the next election with new ideas and, quote, not the policies of 2019, end quote. Reeves reiterated this point in July 2022 when she stated that Labour would not nationalise rail. Then that was corrected by a spokesperson who said that was a mistake. Asked specifically about taking rail back into public ownership, Starmer said, quote, "When it comes to rail or anything else, I want to be pragmatic about this rather than ideological. I think what some of our mayors and metro mayors are doing with public transport is the right way forward, absolutely focused on keeping the price down and making sure there's control where things go, particularly buses recently," end quote. So clearly you can see Starmer and Reeves were non-committal about nationalising rail, despite the fact that rail would be the easiest service to nationalise because all you have to do is not renew the contract. So it's not really about not having the money to do it or not. It's a question of, do you accept the services to be poor and have profits siphoned off with rail users being price gouged? To an extent, a Labour spokesperson echoed what Reeves said, saying, quote, "We are pragmatic about public ownership as long as it sits within our fiscal rules," a point Rachel was underlining in the interview by referencing this framework. For example, "We know there is a positive role for rail in public ownership," end quote. So one interview, Reeves said Labour would not nationalise rail. That was corrected as being a mistake. Official Labour policy at the time was to bring rail under common ownership. At around the same period, Labour's Transport Secretary Louise Hay took to social media posting, quote, "Labour is committed to public ownership of rail and putting the public back in control of our bus network to drive down prices, improve services and meet net zero," end quote. Starmer was barely talking about buses, but it's a bit weird. So was Reeves. So Labour was a complete mess on this one, backing out of nationalising of water and energy, etc. But maybe keeping rail. How is anyone meant to keep up with this? And with Labour backing out of nationalising the other utilities, is anyone going to believe them when they say they will sort out rail? Those other ones I can see the logic of, backing out of nationalising energy and water because of the cost of buying out the companies. All of this despite, France buying the rest of EDF or the vast majority of it now, despite the cost of it. But okay, cool. I can kind of see the logic here. But on rail, it's a complete failure of communication. Either that or Reeves's brain just melted, with Starmer's also seemingly doing the same. Very odd stuff here. And, we now have the news that the government has nationalised the services previously offered by a company called TransPennine Express. So it's clear that Labour don't have to nationalise. Labour doesn't just have to nationalise the companies, the providers. Instead, they can just not renew their contracts or take over the services of failing train providers. They don't have to bail out these companies or buy them. But Labour have come out in the last, recently with Louise Hay saying, quote, "The time has come to bring all private rail operators under public ownership," end quote. So this is around the news of the Tories having to nationalise the train services of another company. And, Louise Hay here being very definitive in the statement that she's kind of making.
So the fact that the Conservatives have had to bring into public control 4 franchises in the last 5 years, we think demonstrates that the time has come to bring all private operators under public ownership and deliver a unified system that can bring an end to this complexity, this inefficiency and waste, and deliver a service that passengers across Britain really deserve.
And so for me, I agree with that. The time has come to bring all private rail operators under public ownership. She's saying that that's what the Tories have basically demonstrated with all their failures. And so I 100% agree with this. But in my heart, I don't know if they're actually going to do it based on the fact that there's so many broken promises. But this kind of stuff, I think, is in their draft manifesto about nationalising rail. So we wait and see on this one. And, if they don't do it, we do our best to hold them accountable towards that. But, I hope they do this one because the train services in this country are a mess. It looks like the more unpopular the train operators become, the happier Labour are to push this narrative of bringing the trains or their services under national ownership, which is fine. It's good politics. But again, why was Starmer and Reeves making out like they were not going to nationalise these train services, especially when it was the easiest one to renationalise and the cheapest one? Shake my head. It just don't make sense. The mess Labour's policy, comms and messaging are. I think this brings us neatly onto these next points, really. Labour's policy seems to be a bit of a contradictory mess, rightfully opposing Tory legislation in the Commons and the Lords, some really scathing stuff as we've gone over. But when they're asked about repealing the Police Crime and Sentencing Courts Act of 2022 and the Public Order Act 2023, they seem lost on it, claiming they don't have enough time despite how bad these laws are. The court messaging around this is so bad that some Labour MPs have expressed unease, saying they'll seek clarification. Labour attacked the illegal immigration bill, but when they had the chance to delay it, they missed it. When asked if Labour would repeal the Illegal Immigration Act, if it became a law, Emily Thornberry said of course they would, but then made that nonsensical time limit argument before qualifying her answer, saying it would be on her list to repeal it. So this is Emily Thornberry being asked about the illegal immigration bill, and her answer is interesting to say the least.
Clearly, it's wrong, it's immoral, and it's not going to work.
And would you repeal it?
Well, I think we should repeal it. Yes, of course I do. But I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, we have been completely against it. We have voted against it every way. We have tried to amend it. We've tried to make it, better. We've tried to knock the edges off. But I mean, there's so much legislation that we disagree with. If we spend all our time repealing Conservative legislation, we won't be able to put forward our positive agenda.
And there she used the word repeal, not amend. If they repeal this bill, which, like I said, they can do so within a day. That's the problem. So they have time to repeal bills. So the argument here, she's saying like they would repeal it. Of course she wants to repeal it, but she makes the time argument that Labour have been consistent about. They don't have time to fix these issues. So for anyone to argue, which people have tried to argue, that Labour do not have enough, or Labour will fix these issues, doesn't make sense unless they fundamentally promise to fix these issues, because they've given themselves a consistent excuse here in all of these clips, which is they argue they don't have time.
Yeah, I mean, this would be on my list of things to repeal.
It is argued that if Labour stopped the bill, the right-wing press would have attacked them. But given what Thornberry said about repealing the legislation if it became a law, wouldn't the right-wing press just run with that anyways and say, see, if we elect Labour, they would allow more boats to come here by repealing this illegal immigration law if it passed. So the argument about not stopping the bill because of the reaction of the right-wing press does not hold water either. But Thornberry said Labour would repeal it, even though the Labour Lords failed to turn up to delay it. So they're just making more work for themselves, really, if they come into power. On the nationalisation of rail, you can't argue that the country can't afford that one, because it would be pretty cheap to do compared with nationalising any other utility, because with rail you're not actually buying anyone out. Reeves said in an interview that Labour would not nationalise rail, but then had to correct the record. So two really odd things from her. It just makes Labour look untrustworthy and confused due to a record of broken promises. Labour's comms team is a complete mess. A spokesperson tried to clean up Lammy's mess on the anti-protest laws, with Nandy kind of echoing what the spokesperson said. But even then, it was two different messages, because Nandy did not mention that Labour planned to create their own policing bill, their own kind of bill around that stuff. Maybe this is because they have not figured it out yet. But then the spokesperson mentioned the plan anyways. Very weird. Then you have Starmer come out with something very different from what Nandy said, saying we're just going to wait for guidance and let the Public Order Act 23, quote, bed down, end quote. Worse, he did this while basically parroting the same lines as the Tories, saying people have the right to peacefully protest, but the police need additional powers to deal with Just Stop Oil. As Robert Peston, who interviewed Starmer on this issue, pointed out, the police already have enough power as is. Even the Labour spokesperson cited above said that the police have enough powers as is. It's very disappointing for a QC and former head of prosecutions to not see this, or worse, just skate over it. All of the mixed messaging is tying Labour MPs in knots and causing Labour to get lit up in the media. And we've covered Labour getting lit up in the media before over this stuff. It's just embarrassing. It's also negatively impacting media people who are trying to explain and defend Labour's position, and is not a pretty sight. So the impact it's had on commentators like James O'Brien and Phil from A Different Bias. So on this point, let's discuss James O'Brien. So O'Brien originally said Lammy's quotes had been taken out of context and that it was not true Labour would not repeal the anti-protest bill. O'Brien called it a misapprehension that Labour would not repeal this law and insulted people who put out the Lammy clips, insinuating they were not doing so, insinuating they were doing so because they were Corbynites.
No, that's unfortunately a misapprehension. I think that was a consequence of David Lammy saying something on LBC over the weekend.
Yes, I did hear him say.
And what happens is, I'll explain this to you because it's actually quite important, and it's a mark, of course, of how far LBC has come in recent years. You have some very strange people out there who spend their days desperately trying to resurrect the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn. So David Lammy says something off the cuff and out of context on LBC, and one of these weirdos clips it up and puts it out as proof that the Labour Party isn't going to be repealing any of this, and they're not going to be doing anything at all to remove legislation that they actually voted against in the first place. But the Labour have since clarified that is not the case at all. Not that it will get tweeted by all the clowns who came across your path or whose path you came across over the weekend, because they're too busy trying to pass electric shock therapy through the corpse of Jeremy Corbyn's political career. But hey-ho, it's up to us to get the truth out there, people.
He also had other disparaging things to say, as we've just heard. Now, the problem for O'Brien is that the next day, Starmer doubled down on this, not repealing the laws thing. So instead of O'Brien admitting he was wrong, O'Brien doubles down, saying Starmer is doing this for reasons, for, quote, reasons that are obvious, end quote.
Caused great delight, I don't know if you saw, it caused great delight in the darker corners of the internet yesterday by explaining at about 12:30 why the Labour Party hadn't actually pledged or refused to confirm that they would repeal this bill. And then about 4 hours later, Keir Starmer on Robert Peston's programme did sort of refuse to pledge that they would repeal this bill. And he does that for reasons that are obvious to anyone paying attention. He does that so that Rishi Sunak cannot stand up for the next 18 months and say Keir Starmer is siding with the protesters.
So how do we go from, quote, Lammy was taken out of context, end quote, and saying that the notion that, quote, Labour were not going to repeal the laws being a misapprehension, to then saying... You know,
and he does that for reasons that are obvious to anyone paying attention.
It don't make sense. And now, I don't watch a lot of O'Brien's show, mainly because the guys who used to upload it onto YouTube don't anymore. And the dude is pretty smug, but his saga on this point ended with him asking Sadiq Khan about it, and Sadiq responded by stating that Labour might not have enough time because these laws are complicated, and if you want to take out the bad stuff, essentially amend them and keep the good bits in it, that takes time. And that's a fair argument, I think, from Sadiq Khan. I don't think it's great, given what I don't think it's great, but, again, given how bad these laws are, Labour should just straight commit to getting rid of them. You can kind of see a kind of U-turn. He doesn't really admit to it, but he admits kind of Starmer has ruled out repealing the bill, which is quite interesting because, what's-his-face, Phil hasn't come to that conclusion yet.
Lawful to protest. You're a lawyer. Keir Starmer's a lawyer. He ruled out repealing this act earlier this week.
There's the U-turn there.
Is there a confusion among non-lawyers about the distinction between repeal and reform when we talk about bills like this and bills like the immigration bill?
Yes, so when you repeal an act, you basically remove it from the statute book. So even the good stuff in the act you cannot use anymore. And that's why there's a separate discussion about priorities in relation to, finite time in a parliament. And so, if there are provisions of any act that should be withdrawn, rather than you repealing the entire act, what you do is you pass a new piece of legislation and have clauses in there which remove sections of a previous act. It's happened forever, continue happening going forward. That's a better way to improve legislation already passed rather than repealing an entire act.
And you're confident that a future Labour government would seek to reform the Public Order Act or the immigration bill?
A question of priorities. I think the fact that the Labour Party in Parliament voted against third reading shows their unhappiness with many provisions of the Act. The question, which I can't answer, is, when it comes to a new Labour government, fingers crossed, next year, how much parliamentary time there is. They'll be dealing with the cost of living crisis, with fixing the NHS, with fixing our schools, with addressing the issue of violence against women and girls and other big issues. And the question is, how much time is there in Parliament to amend legislation, and it's a question of priorities for the then Chief Whip and the Prime Minister.
So this is what I mean here. Like, you know, he's qualified it by saying, if you amend the act, then that's going to take a lot of parliamentary time. But, you know, these acts are so toxic that what you can do is you can overturn them and then come up with a new bill that has all of the stuff you want in it, rather than going back through the old stuff. This is what I mean here, guys. Like, and this is something that's, like I said, that's what Caroline Lucas said, who is a parliamentarian as well and has a lot of experience with this stuff. And that's what I think Labour should be doing here. But wherever you can argue amend or repeal, this stuff has to go, because, like I said, you have police officers just locking up peaceful protesters because they have the power to do so. And for Starmer to argue, like he did previously, just because you have the power, just because the police have the power to do something, doesn't mean they should do it. Just makes him look incredibly naive, in my opinion. Time being an issue is a smokescreen. After all, the Tories passed the Trade and Cooperation Agreement in about a day. Indeed, Caroline Lucas is also on record saying it's possible to get rid of the Public Order Act within a day. The arguments that Labour cannot address it because they need to focus on the cost of living issues are bogus and make no sense. After all, cost of living is an issue that is primarily dealt with by the budget. You can do a lot with the budget: increase benefits, change taxes, do the windfall tax that Labour keep talking about, etc. Dealing with inflation can be one of those things. They are limited because of the Bank of England, because they keep setting interest rates up because they're lunatics, but there are things Labour can do here. So these arguments are rubbish that Labour keep coming out with. And we move on to talk about the other person who has found himself out of step with the Labour stances due to their flips, and uses similar bad arguments. So the video on Labour and peaceful protesting. So we're just going to kind of react to this video, and I'm going to pick out some of the key points here, and we'll go over it in a conclusion to get overall conclusion together. But what he's saying here is, you can watch the full video for yourself. Obviously, I'll link it in the description. But he starts with people misinterpreting what David Lammy said when Lammy was asked directly about these bills and if Labour would repeal them.
So anyway, I listened to David Lammy's thing and I thought, has he just been a bit clumsy here? And it's like, they're saying he said Labour won't repeal the Act. And I listened to it and I think, no, he didn't say that, did he? I thought, no, he didn't say that at all. What's people going on about? Essentially, Lammy said that Labour can't spend all their time unpicking Tory legislation in government. He didn't say what they would or wouldn't do to address this issue. He just said, we can't just unpick all Tory legislation. And not only is this true, but you've
got to note that no one asked David Lammy about unpicking all Tory legislation. All he was asked about was the anti-protest bills, or the anti-protest laws. This is a straw man that he set up, that David Lammy set up, and that Phil is also arguing. No one is saying replace all Tory legislation, so it's a straw man.
I've made the point myself over the past couple of years. The Conservatives have been introducing some terrible legislation, particularly over the past few years, but over a decade really. You can't just remove all those laws in government, because the process for repealing or even amending laws is sometimes lengthier than putting them there in the first place. You still have to go through all the same processes. To amend a law, you still have to present a bill to present to you have to present something to Parliament, the amendment you wish to carry out. It has to be debated, voted on. Then it goes to committee for a while. Then the committee has taken evidence, comes back, you debate it again, some people suggest further amendments or changes, whatever. You vote on it again, same process, comes back, third time, off to the House of Lords, and same process again, all happens, comes back to the House of Commons. This takes forever.
And again, this is a straw. He set up a straw man argument, first of all, and this argument, it takes forever. As I said, the House of Commons can expedite certain laws, and I can't imagine the Lords getting in the way here, because the Lords set up their own timetable for debating this stuff. So they could, like I said, they could pass it very quickly. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement, it is different, but it was passed within a day. It was passed very, very quickly. And so for Phil to make this argument, it takes forever and stuff, it's around 100 bills a year are passed in Parliament. So fair enough, maybe Labour can't pass it in the first year because it's going to take time, but the argument, can they not pass it in the second year? It seems very, very doable if Labour wanted to take their time to do it, or put it into their bigger kind of home office, their bigger home bill, or whatever they want to define that as. So I think Phil's argument here is an incredible straw man argument that he makes here.
Stop peaceful protesters being arrested without any legislation. It's easy.
So yeah, this one's pretty bad as well.
Nobody believes the Met Police did what they did on Saturday independently. Nobody believes that.
And his source is trust me, bro.
Such was the immediate support for their actions from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, we can be fairly sure she was driving this. Well, with a Labour Home Secretary, it should be possible to stamp out this sort of heavy-handed approach immediately. All Labour have to do is say, we expect police to respect... Because remember, although there might be some Tory legislation that's allowing the police to have these powers to arrest peaceful protesters, don't forget we still have the Human Rights Act. And human rights lawyers have been saying this is treading on the toes of the human rights, or the European Convention of Human Rights, but the Human Rights Act is how we establish it in domestic law. But the anti-Labour lobby, whether those supporting other parties or just reactively attacking Labour for anything, they wouldn't have been satisfied with whatever was said. The fact of the matter is, Labour have not said it will not repeal it at all.
You know, they said they're going to let it bed in. That's what Starmer said after this video was published, that Labour are going to let it bed in. They've not said they wouldn't repeal it or amend it, but they said they don't have time to do it. That's what they've consistently said. They don't have time. So he's putting the argument of faith here that he believes Labour are going to do the right thing. And does anyone actually believe politicians will do the right thing, left to their own devices? Like, really? Especially when they've made constant excuses as to why they can't do it.
But they're going, oh, they haven't specifically said they're going to repeal the whole thing, so obviously they must mean to allow peaceful protesters to carry on being arrested. No, they didn't say that. So Labour have now put out a statement yesterday saying, of course they're going to make sure peaceful protest is protected. They've made the point...
Again, you know, the Conservatives have said that they are protecting peaceful protest as well. They're using the same sorts of language.
That they opposed the public order bill, they were against it. And further, more explicitly, they've said they believe the police already had the powers they need to prevent serious disruption before. They further said there will, of course, be legislation coming under Labour to undo the damage the Tories have done.
That's not, you know, it's not 100% true that they will deal with these laws, the draconian ones that we spoke about earlier. All they've said is they're going to deal with all the other issues that the government have failed to deal with, rights to, you know, protection to women and all this other stuff. And they have hinted, that spokesperson did hint at fixing the issue. You know, just like what I said with what Nandi said, they said if there's an issue, they will rectify it. But that's kind of been downplayed heavily by Starmer, saying we're going to let the legislation bed in and wait for the guidance. These are two very different things here. And had Phil waited for the Starmer clip to come out, he might not have made the points that he's made here. But because he's made this video very quickly, he's not let himself have much time to see how this is actually going to play out here. And that's one of the other problems I think he has.
So, again, people will go, it's not clear enough for me. It is clear enough. It's absolutely clear. They have said the police do not need these latest powers. They have said they will use legislation. They have said they will protect people's rights to peaceful protest.
I do wonder, has he stopped writing scripts? Is he just kind of ad-libbing some of this stuff? It's a bit weird. But like I said, you know, Labour have not committed to repealing these bills. They haven't really even committed to amending them. Starmer is very clear in saying he's going to wait and see how it plays out. And that's what Labour, the spokesperson, said as well. If there's any issues, they will look to fix them. But right now, it's not really their concern, even though we've seen the issues at the coronation. You know, there are other people who have said the public order bills cause them issues. The problem is, though, it won't go, you know, this stuff won't be able to be legally challenged unless either these protesters kind of try and sue the police in court over this stuff, which I don't know if the police are even in the wrong here legally, or if one of these cases go to court, like the police charge these people based on intent, you know, they go with it and try and drag this whole thing through the courts to see if they're legally in the right here. So Phil's arguments here are very, very weak on this stuff. Once again, there's a couple of more bits and pieces I want to bring out of this video, and then we'll do the conclusion.
Now, I mean, they're going to get the rights anyway.
We're going to get the rights anyways, so...
Feel better. No. But don't worry, you've got more rights now. I mean, they're going to get the rights anyway.
So he's arguing... he's arguing that, you know, Labour have to do all of this stuff to make people feel, you know, to essentially fix the cost of living crisis. But don't worry, though, you're going to get your rights back anyway, so don't complain. You know, you just, you know, it's going to happen. It doesn't make any sense because, like I said, politicians do not do the right thing unless you make them.
But you do it efficiently. And I also must say, while I'm on my soapbox here, this is more than just another case of unpleasant or naive people spreading misinformation, whether deliberately or unintentionally. This is yet another case of people on social media. This is what they're saying, right? This is what they're saying. We hate all these things the Conservatives have done. Let's blame Labour for it and then persuade people to use their vote in such a way as to ensure another Conservative government. That's what they're saying. I've seen them all. People who reckon that they're supporting left-wing policies. And they're all going, oh, these things the Conservatives do are absolutely terrible. Let's kick Labour in the head over it.
And, you know, again, it's a really stupid point he's making here, because what people are asking Labour is, are you going to fix these issues that the Conservatives have made? Are you going to fix the things that the Conservative Party have done to essentially arrest peaceful protesters? And Labour have said, nah, bro, not me. You know, maybe if I got time, bro, I might fix some stuff, bro. But, you know, right now, you know, I'm a busy man. You know, David Lammy's got 50 jobs out here. He got stuff to do. He ain't got time for this. And that's what I mean. Like, it's just the constant kind of straw man arguments, because he hasn't, you know, has he actually spoken to these people properly? You know, has he actually tried to figure out their motive? Some of them, like I said, are too far gone. And that's fine. You can't communicate with people that are too far gone, who hate Starmer and don't care what he has to say. But I don't think a lot of them are. I wouldn't say I'm a too far gone, you know. But that's the thing, you know. He's kind of assuming they're attacking his teammate, his guy. That's the problem. And that's something we'll discuss a bit later.
Because what they really want is the Tories to win. Not because they want a Tory government, but because they don't want Labour to win.
Talking about the people who posted these clips and stuff like that, saying these people want a Tory government to win, because then they can say, I told you so.
They don't calmly think to themselves, well, actually, what's better, an imperfect Labour government or a Conservative government? They just think, Labour aren't doing exactly as I want, so they must lose so I can teach them a lesson. That's what they want. They want Labour to lose so they can say they lost because they didn't do what I said. Now, do what I say next time, learn your lesson.
And so, you know, again, he's questioning the intent of the people. For me, I want Labour to repeal these bills. I want them to do better. But he's immediately jumped to conclusions about what the intents of some of these people are. Like I said, some of them do, I think, want Labour to lose because they don't like Starmer and they want to say, look, your centre-left policies have failed once again, like they failed in 2015 under Ed Miliband. But he's kind of put all of these people into one giant group here when we know that's not the case. That's the key problem here. And moving on, we'll move on to the conclusion. So the key takeaways, you know, from this video are that even if politicians say they will not restore key rights like the right to do effective protests, they will obviously restore the rights because, trust me, bro, even though Labour keeps saying they won't have enough time to actually repeal these laws, they have not said they can't amend these laws, but they have not said they wouldn't amend these laws. So effectively, because Labour haven't ruled out amending it, something, I don't know, it don't make sense. So that's reassuring, I guess. But like, if this is the thing you're hinging your hopes on, well, Labour have not officially ruled out that they won't amend the laws, then of course they will do something about it. If that's your hope, then that is really wishful thinking, I think, on your part. And if you don't know what Labour are going to do, just say it. You know, there's nothing wrong with just saying you don't know or you're not sure what Labour are doing here. Don't portray these issues as fringe, you know, because they're not. The right to protest is fundamental in any democracy. There's a reason why the ACLU, you know, defended the KKK's right to protest, because regardless of who you are, the right to protest is fundamental. You question the intentions of the people who posted these clips. Instead of properly addressing their concerns, you downplay them and pretend they're non-issues when we laid out that they're pretty important. While it is an issue, it is true that some of these people posting these clips could be angry at Starmer for various reasons and might want Labour to fail. Those specific people are too far gone, so you're not going to win them back. But not all of these people concerned by this stuff are like that. You know, we have to admit here, Labour goofed on this issue pretty hard, as we have laid out, and for him, you know, for Phil and O'Brien to rush to the defence of Labour very quickly instead of calling out the issues only to have Starmer pull the rug from under them is utterly humiliating, in my opinion. The video on the illegal immigration bill. So this is another video in the space of, you know, a couple of days ago. He does a lot of mental gymnastics to try and protect Labour from the fallout of them not getting involved and stopping the illegal immigration bill, or at least delaying it by a year. And the takes here are, I think, particularly bad. I think this might be one of the worst ones I've seen from him in defending Labour, and this is ultimately what the party have done to him to try and get, you know, they've convinced him that they're doing the right things here, and he kind of goes into more detail about why he kind of thinks the way he does, I think.
Migration bill is well named. Not because it tackles illegal migration, which is what the Tories would like you to think, but because the bill is quite illegal. The intentions of the bill are dead against international law as well as basic human decency, and it should be taken out and given the old yellow treatment immediately.
So essentially, he's saying Labour should go in there and ultimately get rid of this bill. I've not seen Labour commit to getting rid of this bill at all if it comes into force, and so clearly he's against it, and it's fine because the bill was terrible. We know that to be true, but then the arguments he used are pretty stupid.
19 Conservative Party manifesto, the source of all mandates for any government was what was in your manifesto.
So that's another important point for posterity, that the party, they get their power from the manifesto. That one's an important one. So when he argues that certain bits, if they're not in the manifesto, like repealing this public order bill, he can't then say, oh well, it's Labour have the power to then fix it, or Labour are then going to fix it, when they don't really have a mandate to fix it at that point, really.
Anyone who comes to this country to seek asylum...
So he's talking about the bill here.
...is automatically to be deported. No questions about it. Now, it remains to be seen if that's how it works in practice, but that is the stated intention of this bill. So no question about it at all, as far as I can see. Constitutionally, the Lords, unelected they may be, can absolutely reject this bill out of hand because the public have not expressed any desire to see it through.
That's true, and normally that's how the Lords work. If it's not a manifesto promise, they can block it. That's a fine argument.
End it instead. Now, they have argued...
So it's about Labour, the Lords not ending the bill.
...that if they block the bill completely, the government will just ram it through with the Parliament Act, bypassing the House of Lords, and it would then pass through in its current form. They're essentially arguing that it is better to amend the bill so that it is much less offensive than to see the government force it through in its full evil. So, does this argument hold water? No, not really. However, Labour probably do have a good reason for not killing the bill. It's just not the reason they're giving publicly. So 2 parts then. Why is their stated argument invalid, and what might the real, more valid reason be? Their argument is invalid because although the government could indeed ram the bill through using the Parliament Act, and would indeed mean no amendments, they would have to wait for another session of Parliament to do so. Being realistic, there isn't time to have one before the general election. So if the House of Lords did vote to sink the bill completely, the government probably don't have another realistic opportunity to get it passed into law before the general election. Because even if, let us say they were to end a session of Parliament this autumn, say, start a new one, they'd have to start again. It wouldn't just pick up where it left off. They'd have to start it again. It would have to go through the same stages in the House of Commons, before which, unless they really are going for a late general election, there's just not time.
So, effectively, if Labour had got involved here, they would have stopped this bill. And that's his own analysis there, by the way. That's not mine. That's him saying if Labour got involved here, they would have stopped it. And, Labour's reasoning on this bill makes no sense. So these are 2 things that he's admitted here. And I think these are 2 fair points to make. I think they can still put this thing through. If Labour had stopped it when they had the chance in the Lords, I still think the Tories would have forced this one through, because that's the kind of people they are. But then this further makes his next points really stupid. If it's the case that he believes Labour could have, by Labour stopping this bill would not have time to be passed next year. It makes the rest of this video really dumb.
Invited to their private meetings or anything, but
he's not invited to their private meetings. So
to me to be strategic. I'll explain by going over what would happen if the Lords actually voted the bill down, defeating it completely. If that happened, the very next day, the Tory government would immediately claim that they have this plan which will stop the boats. It's one of Sunak's 5 promises, remember, legislation to stop the boats. I'm going to pass this legislation to stop the boats. Never mind that they said that last year and passed the legislation and it didn't stop the boats. Oh no, this legislation will stop the boats, but Labour stopped it. All of the asylum problems would then, overnight, become Labour's problems, Labour's fault. Now, being clear, this bill doesn't actually do anything on a practical level. It won't stop the boats. It won't stop the rising backlog of immigration cases. It won't do anything other than make the Tories look even more feckless and evil. But if peers block it, the government will say that it would have solved the whole problem. We had this bill that was going to deal with the whole problem. In fact, when Sunak made his stop the boats promise, but without any serious plan to do so, I actually wondered what his fiddle would be. See, I wondered if the government expected Labour and Lib Dems to block this bill. I wondered if Sunak was actually banking on the fact that they would block this bill, playing into their hands, because that is what would happen. What Labour are almost certainly doing here is avoiding the trap of being blamed for the Tories' mess. They know that the idea of blaming the last Labour government for the mess that's going on today is wearing a bit thin on the public.
Yeah, and he says, like, you know, they might try and blame Labour if they block this. But like I said, Sunak's manifesto pledge was to pass a law to stop the boats. And so that was his pledge, right? And so what Labour have done is they've given him that. Even Phil admits that was the pledge that Sunak made. That Sunak said that he would pass laws to stop the boats, and we went through the promise, to detain people, etc. So, what Phil's argument of this mess, Sunak now owns it. It's okay. It's kind of an okay-ish argument. Like I said, I can kind of see the fudge, or you'll see it in the conclusion of this bit. I can kind of see the fudge here. The problem is it doesn't make sense, because Sunak said his pledge was, I will pass laws to stop the boats, and Labour have given him that law. They've given him that pledge win, basically.
For some people who just don't seem to get it, this is...
Oh, see, there it is. There's the smugness. You just don't get it.
Another case of reality biting. It is realpolitik. Labour need the government to have full agency over all of their policies. They must not allow them to blame others. They know that this bill, if passed into law, won't actually meet Sunak's promise. They know he'll have nobody to blame because they didn't block it. Even the amendments which the Lords can suggest could be rejected by Tory MPs in Parliament if they wanted, although it's quite likely they'll... I don't actually know what the amendments would be. It's possible that they will accept some. But this is just like in 2020. In 2020,
it's nothing like in 2020. This is one of the dumbest arguments I've heard.
Well, as the pandemic, the Tories insisted on going ahead with their trade and cooperation agreement negotiations. People were saying, why don't we delay it until after we've dealt with the pandemic? No, full steam ahead. Starmer had nothing to say on the matter because he didn't want the Tories to blame Labour for a crap deal. Boris Johnson would say, it was Labour chipping in, it weakened our hand. They tried it anyway. Notice how they tried it anyway, trying to suggest that Labour weakened their hand. That's why we ended up with a crap deal. It's what they were always planning to do. But Starmer was going, no, this is on you. And he said it at the time. This is on you. This is all on you. I'm not getting involved, because he couldn't anyway. Leader of the opposition doesn't have the votes to do anything.
The problem with this analysis is that the difference between now and the TCA is that the TCA, we were coming out of the transitional period with the EU. Our single market access was basically going to end, and they got the TCA done, because we needed a free trade agreement, because we would have went out on a no-deal Brexit. So Starmer didn't really say anything, in my opinion, because he knew that, and if Starmer tried to block the TCA from being passed, we would have went out on a no-deal, and then, Johnson would have said, look, we had this great trade deal that Starmer blocked. He was time constrained, basically. That's the difference here. And him arguing that this bill is the same as the TCA makes no sense, because there's no time constraint on this bill. There's no time limit. So what he's saying here makes absolutely no sense. Starmer really didn't have a choice on the TCA, and it would have made things worse if Labour went out and opposed it. Whereas this bill is very different, because this bill, like he said, his own analysis, that this bill is abhorrent and it will potentially breach international law and things like that. There's the difference there. So he's conflating two things here that really shouldn't conflate, and I don't know why he's doing that. I think that's pretty poor on his part. So there's a couple of more bits I want to talk about.
Next year there'll be another bit of legislation needed. For all those who consider asylum an important enough issue to use their vote on, the sane ones will vote for Labour, the insane ones will vote for Reform UK, but only the truly deranged will vote Conservative. It's not a hot button issue in Lib Dem target seats, by the way, hence they've got no need to engage in this nonsense.
I mean, immigration is a hot button issue in Lib Dem seats. They're not complete lunatics on immigration, so...
And I will just finish off by pointing out that one complaint about the move being that, it's all right talking about...
This is where it gets really bad. There's another point where it gets really bad.
This, but real lives have been sacrificed by this decision. I disagree. The lives are sacrificed whenever we allow the Conservatives to form governments. Labour are doing this for strategic purposes, guaranteed.
And, just to add here, the lives are being sacrificed because Labour, the Labour are allowing the Tories to get away with this. That's the problem. Labour could have done something and chose not to.
That is a mathematical way of me saying they're doing it to kick the Tories out. Yes, Labour have a very nice lead in the polls. We're not actually heading for a hung parliament despite what the Tory press say. It looks like a nice majority. But they have built that lead up by making strategic decisions that a lot of people have disagreed with. The same people that have disagreed with this and this and this. If Labour had done what they'd have said, they wouldn't have that lead.
Now, I disagree with that pretty strongly regarding this polling lead, and that's something we'll discuss in a bit when we discuss how Labour actually got this polling lead, or, in my opinion, how Labour really got the polling lead, but fine.
They've built that lead up by making the strategic decisions, which aren't always nice. They haven't done it by being complacent enough to think, well, we can sacrifice the odd bit of strategy because, this is a terrible thing, clutching our pearls and all that.
And I would say that a law that we've gone through that's this abhorrent is not about clutching pearls. This is a law that people will suffer under. Kids will be detained. Women will lose rights. To the point where if they're trafficked to this country, they will have no real rights to get police help. They will not be helped by the Modern Slavery Act. So this is not about pearl clutching, and he does this weird thing where he'll downplay like really important issues like this, like the protest stuff, calling it fringe and saying, we can't clutch our pearls over this law. And like I've said, it's really bad. And like Cooper said, it's really bad. I just despair.
However well Labour do in a general election tomorrow, and at the moment it looks like they would do very well, it will also be less well in the real thing, because the polls are going to tighten during the campaign itself. The Conservatives are going to have their campaign directed by someone with a brain, Isaac Levidow. He will improve the Conservatives' image. I don't know how many times I have to say it. The Labour leader, and I've said this, Starmer in place, I've said it with Corbyn in place. If I was shouting on the internet, I'd have said it with the others as well. The Labour leader in opposition has one job: to form a government. That is it. Nothing else.
I disagree with that. I think the Labour government's job is not to just win government, it's to hold the government accountable. That's one of the things Ed Miliband actually did when he stopped a British military intervention in Syria, where he stopped Cameron getting involved there. So the Labour opposition job is not just to win, it's to hold the government accountable with the limited power that they do have. In my opinion, that's their role. That's the reason we have PMQs and things like that, is to try and hold the government accountable, just like they should have done here. Labour should have done the right thing here. And his analysis that lives will be sacrificed, well, that's what happens when people vote Tory. So it doesn't matter that much, and we can't blame Labour for the things that the Tories do, despite Labour having the power to stop this. I think his analysis here is really bad, and I think he's just gotten to a point where he doesn't care about consequences at this point. Like he said, the one job of the leader of the opposition is to win, and he doesn't care how they do that. And I think that's just really a dark place to really think from. At least in my opinion. There's a couple of bits more, I promise. There's not too much more on this one.
But right now, one job. And I will not thank any Labour leader for allowing a Conservative government to win again because they needed to clutch their pearls. I didn't thank Corbyn for it. I didn't thank Miliband for it. I didn't thank Brown for it.
Now, I don't remember Ed Miliband clutching pearls over anything, honestly, so I don't know what he's talking about specifically. And once again, he doesn't actually offer specifics. Ed Miliband's problem was that people still believe Labour caused the financial crash and things like that. And that's one of the things that Ed Miliband did, and obviously the infamous sandwich. And I think when people went to actually vote, they just didn't have faith in Ed Miliband, I think, as a person and the Labour Party as a whole. And, I'm a guy who likes Ed Miliband a lot. I'm constantly talking about Red Ed Redemption and all this kind of stuff. So don't call me an Ed Miliband hater, because he's probably one of the few MPs I like on the front bench. He seems like a decent guy. I would love to interview him at some point in my life. There's one more thing I think I wanted to discuss here.
As we not only know that, but they've said it. They've said it as much. Labour will set up a system for asylum claimants. As we not only know that, but they've said it. They've said it as much. And this legislation can then die just as quietly as if it had been blocked this week, because it will have no force in law, because the government won't use it. They can just quietly get rid of it later on.
The problem here is that the people, once they come to the UK, they will be detained. That's the problem. The problem is, what do you do when people get here? It's not a question of how long they will be detained for, because by sorting out the backlog, you sort that out. The question is, what happens to them immediately after they land in the UK, or get here by boat in the UK? Are they going to be detained in, put in, cages effectively? Because if Labour continue on with that, because that's what this bill allows, then that's abhorrent. And this argument that Labour will basically make it so that these things don't have to be used, etc., is just nonsense. And I think this is a guy who hasn't read what the bill actually does, especially when he makes the point he's about to make very shortly.
Only if it were blocked this week, of course, it would give the Tories a boost for the election, risking the chance that it would not only become law in all its misplaced glory, but used for years to come to sacrifice more lives under a Conservative government lurching ever further to the right.
He makes the point in the video that all this legislation does is allow the Home Secretary to be a dick. Let's see if I find that.
Miliband for it. I didn't thank Brown for it. And this bill, this isn't like the Policing Act or the Public Order Act or the other bits of legislation that are coming, like the Online Harms Bill. This isn't something that Labour would even really need to deal with if they were in power.
It's ironic in this video he's saying that this isn't a bill, this specific illegal immigration bill isn't one they would have to deal with when they're in power, but the public order bill is one they would have to, the public order law is one they would have to deal with when in power. But yet he contradicted himself, because in his other video, which only came out about 2 days before this, he said Labour don't really have to do anything on it. He just said, like, the Home Secretary can just tell the police to pack it in and stop doing that. Like, the mental gymnastics this brother's going through is actually crazy at this point.
It gives the government certain powers to be a dick.
Now, we've gone through the bill. I'll let you be the judge for it. But as I said, it's more than that. It's the way people are dealt with once they come into the country. That's one of the key problems here. So, the arguments don't make sense. And we'll do like an overall kind of summary of this one. And it'll be a bit more clear rather than me going through stream of consciousness. So, the key takeaways of this video are that Labour could have stopped a bill that he admits was really bad, as we've talked about, but they didn't do that. They didn't do that because they have built up a huge polling lead by being strategic. One where the polls are going to tighten up anyways, because the Tories are going to bring in an election savant, and that generally happens around elections anyways, that polls tighten up. Right, so Labour are going to lose that poll lead regardless, according to him, but Labour did the right thing here to keep that lead as is. He admits that if Labour stopped this bill, then when they had the chance, it probably would not get passed even next year because of the impending general election, or potential general election. But it's okay, because now Sunak does not have any excuse for failing to stop the boats, despite the actual pledge on the government website being only to pass new laws to stop the boats and detain people. I can kind of see the fudge here, but Phil does not seem to understand this bill because he claims that it only allows the Home Secretary to be, quote, a dick, end quote. We'll go back to the Cooper quote around this bill. Quote, it will lock up children, remove support and safe refuges for women who have been trafficked, and it will deny citizenship for people like Mo Farah, end quote. Now, I would describe this as being a bit more than a dick. I would say that removing protections from women and locking up children is pretty horrendous, and something that no nation state should be doing, looking at you, the USA. A bill that Labour could have delayed, but, how many percentage points in the polls could this give Labour or take away from the Tories? 5, 6? Polls that, according to him, are going to tighten up anyways. I fail to see the logic here. But this is what the Labour Party have done to him. The dude is constantly trying to read between the lines and justify things when it just does not make sense to do so. It can just make you look really silly sometimes. And so now we'll discuss why I think they are doing this. So why are James O'Brien and Phil taking these stances? So I think the most charitable reasoning I can give is that in his videos, Phil attributes way too much logic to Starmer. Politics is super emotional. You check the Brexit referendum for that one. People in the UK think they're voting for the leader like the American presidential system, but you're really voting for your local candidates. In his video about Starmer and PR, Phil says that it makes sense for Starmer to push PR only after either a first or second term, though he's not clear on which one. Phil argues that it makes sense because it cements Starmer's potential achievements and stops the Tories from undoing them as easily. The issue is that most prime ministers don't go into elections thinking they won't win a majority. We have seen this before with Tony Blair promising PR in the 97 manifesto, but didn't deliver it. Cameron in 2015 being an exception because he thought there would be a hung parliament, so he would not have to do the Brexit referendum. He thought he'd get another coalition of the Lib Dems. Boy, was he wrong. In 97, Labour's manifesto stated, quote, "We are committed to a referendum on the voting system for the House of Commons. An independent commission on voting systems will be appointed to recommend a proportional alternative to the first past the post system," end quote. Now, I was pretty young back then. I'll be honest, I was very, very young back then, but I don't remember this referendum happening. And, you know, really the only way we're going to get a PR system is by it being forced in a hung parliament like we saw in 2010, where the Lib Dems got that from the Tories. All this spinning with the spokesperson thing is just embarrassing, and it just looks like mental gymnastics. We also know that Phil is obsessed with looking at that Labour polling lead. Makes sense given he's a data guy. It's his background. It seems his partial view is that Labour earned this lead by being strategic and making great decisions, when really it's mostly been handed to them because of Partygate and the Trust budget. Labour obviously had to look competent with stuff like the windfall tax, amongst other things. This is not a hard-fought lead here. This is the Tories constantly scoring own goals. And if we look at, you know, kind of the Politico average of polls here, so if we have a look here, right, so Partygate is the first one, that's important. So around the 6th of December, that's when everything started being leaked. So if we go to the broader polls, okay, so you can see the 2019 general election, you can see obviously the Tories did really well. Polls tighten up here around November 2021. November 2020. I'm not 100% sure why this happened, but we had been through some really bad lockdowns and whatever, right? So people, you know, obviously angry at the Tories. But I want you to look at this. 39-39, both parties are on, right? So you can see Conservatives come back a bit in the polls, and then we head into kind of the winter of 2021, and both parties have lower polls, but lower polling numbers, but are both the same, 36-36, whereas before, when they were joint, it's 39-39, right? But then you see Labour, from the Partygate fiasco, pull ahead, and they've consistently held this lead. And then Liz Truss became Prime Minister. We had the kamikaze budget, and then, you know, sort of slowly the Tories have kind of pulled this back a bit. It's not looking great. You know, you can look at different polling data, but I'd assume it'd show you a similar picture. I'd just go through the political average of polls because it's easier. So now that we've got that out of the way, once we've looked at the average of polls, when we look at the situation in the UK, it's awful, and the Tories have sole responsibility for that. If the Tories can make things a bit more tolerable, they might get away with another win. But, you know, that polling lead, like I said, did Keir Starmer cause Partygate to happen? Did he, you know, say to Boris Johnson, "Oh, you know, go have a party. Who's going to stop you? No one's going to know." And then did he then leak that information out to the Mirror? Did he tell Liz Truss to do the kamikaze budget and say, "Look, you know, cut taxes on the rich, borrow the money. It's going to grow the economy. Trickle down economics, bro, on steroids"? No. So, you know, the evidence that Labour have really earned this poll lead is yet to be seen. And, you know, with all the problems in the country, Starmer needs to convince people he will fix these problems. But there are a lot of undecided voters. They're a big question mark because Labour should really be doing better with them. And the problem is, you know, in the kind of polls you see in YouGov and all of these other things, they take out the undecided voters. That's one of the problems with the polling data. So if we actually look at this from Redfield and Wilton, you can see in the red wall, Starmer is up by a decent chunk here, almost around the 10-point mark with Labour voters in the red wall. You can see Sunak not doing great, but, you know, back around the spring budget when Dominic Raab resigned, he was doing okay. He was actually doing better than Starmer in the red wall, despite Starmer going out of his way to appeal to red wall voters. But you can see undecided, 29%. That's very high. If you look at in the blue wall, you can see Starmer and Sunak are very close, this is good news. This one's very good news that Labour are so close. But once again, you can see that undecided vote very high. And if that undecided vote goes back to Sunak, which it could do here, it's not good news for us. You can see here, you know, Labour are doing very well in these polls when it comes to the issues surrounding what kind of things matter to voters, you know, tackling poverty, crime, the NHS, all that stuff. Labour are miles ahead, with the Tories only ahead on the response to Ukraine, which they have done okay on, apart from the way they've treated refugees and the sanctions on Russia. And the final one is a head-to-head between the two. That, quote, "don't know," end quote, group is key. This big Labour win, I'm just not seeing it yet. I'm not convinced. All I see is apathy, and that's not good for Labour. They need people to come out and vote, and if their core base does not turn out, that spells trouble. You know, we know with the older Tory voters, they typically turn out to vote, and they will typically vote Tory. So their votes are not guaranteed, but it's a lot more guaranteed than I think Labour's core support. But I think overall, Phil's a logic man who has convinced himself that Labour have earned this lead by being strategic, and that logically, despite what Labour say they will do during the campaign, they will do the right thing once they are in power. But for me, the only way that happens is by voters holding them accountable as much as possible. The idea that, if Labour... the idea that Labour will do a lot of things outside of their manifesto, and him kind of constantly citing the fact that, well, in '97 Tony Blair didn't promise big pay rises for public sector workers, but then delivered them. But it's like, how often does stuff like that happen? How often is that just an exception, that parties typically go outside of their manifesto pledges, apart from the Tories, who love doing it on a regular? Moving on to O'Brien, I think that to an extent O'Brien might be using the same sort of logic as Phil, but I think he's happy to see Labour go back to the centre. O'Brien, a guy who voted for Boris Johnson twice in the mayoral elections. Like Phil, O'Brien seems to think Labour are, of course, going to do the right thing once in power, but he seems maybe a bit more apprehensive on that, hence why he rushed to their defence. But he pivoted to saying, well, Labour will say they're not going to do the right thing by repealing these bills because they have to play the game to win power. But ultimately, they will repeal these bills, and that you're stupid if you don't get it. Ironically, he seems to be a victim of his own term here, the quote, the footballification of politics, unquote, that he seems to think Starmer and, of course, Labour will do the right thing here because he's, air quotes, my guy, he's on my team, end air quotes. And anyone on the left is just on Corbyn's team, trying to bring down, air quotes, my guy. Maybe these two are just so broken by politics and the Tories that they've convinced themselves that no matter what happens, we have to get rid of the Tories. So they do all of these kind of mental gymnastics and pretend that, we, kind of the audience, the average person, don't get the obvious things we can see. O'Brien often quoted Orwell saying, quote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command," end quote. But in this case, it's not the party saying that, asking you to do this. It's these two. It's O'Brien and Phil. When asked about this stuff, they tell you, oh, you misunderstand what's going on, or you just don't get it. Well, of course Labour has to say these things to win power, and of course Labour will sort out these issues, despite Labour giving constant excuses as to why they won't sort it out and the mixed messages around it. And thus, this answers the question that Dante kind of posed to us at the start of the video. Sanity is the price to pay for power. It's the price that Labour are willing to pay, as we see before our very eyes. They're gambling their sanity in exchange for power, however with no guarantee of a win. But I guess, Phil, James O'Brien, Labour, indeed all of us, are all victims of this Tory psychodrama. And so this kind of ends the kind of scripted portion of the video. I did want to give kind of a more off the dome kind of conclusion, or part of it at least. And I think for us, the voters, we have to hold Labour accountable now. We have until the manifesto is fully published, and I think that, look, for me, I live in a Tory seat. It's been Tory since 2010. It's been close-ish in certain elections. What I would say to my local Labour candidate is, I want the repeal of these bills to be in the manifesto. I don't care if it's like page 35, subsection 2, paragraph 8, or some nonsense. I want to see these bills replaced, bills amended or repealed, and I want that in the manifesto, because, like I said, they can just arrest you for no reason. They can stop and search you for no reason, and especially if you're a minority and a woman, or a woman. God, imagine you're both. The police will really go after you there. But it's not. I don't want to see these laws in place. They're incredibly draconian, and I think for people to, for these two and other people to assume Labour are going to do the right thing here, that's not how politics works. Politicians are dragged to do the right thing. It's not that often you see politicians morally do the right thing here. And for them to kind of, for Phil especially, to come out with, really lies you can debunk very easily. He claimed that Labour are going to nationalise energy, despite when you look in the manifesto, the draft manifesto, there is no such pledge. And so I don't know if his source is Senator Armstrong.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Or whatever, but it's just very frustrating to keep seeing that, and it's up to us, the voters. I'm tempted to contact my local Labour candidate, and I think if you guys want to, or the audience wants to, you guys should do the same if you live in the UK, and just tell them, like, I'm going to vote Lib Dem if you do not sort this stuff out, because at least the Lib Dems have policies that I want, and if the Tories win this seat, then we're both losers here. You've lost because you haven't got a high salary job and you're further away from power, and I've lost because the Tories are there. but I will not stand for a Labour government that does not repeal these laws. And you be as convincing as possible, even though you have every intention, just like I do, to vote tactically. You have every intention to vote tactically. We have to make it clear that we are not happy about the direction the Labour Party is going in. The only thing we have is we can leverage our votes. That's all we have, people, and we have to do that. Hopefully the Labour conference can get something on this and try and push Starmer to accept PR, maybe, but I don't know that's going to happen, given that Starmer's consistently said he doesn't like PR, and he's consistently downplayed it, saying it's not one of his priorities, which is politicians speak for. That's going in the long grass. You know, maybe term 2 or 3, I'll pull it out if I need votes, etc. All these people kind of reading between the lines and, you know, having absolutely poor analysis. And honestly, if this is your level of analysis, then hopefully I've shown you that you can do a lot better. Yes, it's hard work. This video was a lot of hard work, but luckily for me, I had the help of the community. I had a lot of help from the community, and they have helped me to no end to put this together, because I do this video for the community, not just for my own sanity here. I do this because these things need to be said. You know, the music that I've kind of played on this bit is by my friend Elazid, you know, really great music composer, and it's a remix of another great music composer, Margin Blue, and you know, the song name is When the Demon Cries. And I think it's apt to end with the son of, you know, the infamous son of Sparta, everyone's favorite demon and my favorite gaming character, Dante. So we'll end it with Dante.
I fail to see the logic here. Sanity. The price to pay for power?